More Stories from Grandma's Attic by Arleta Richardson. Illustrated by Dora Letter. Chapter 6. The Big Snowstorm. I pressed my nose against the kitchen window to watch the snow falling in big flakes past the glass. "Do you think we'll be snowed in, Grandma?" I asked. Grandma came over and looked out the window. "Probably not. If the wind comes up tonight, the snow may drift around the house, but it isn't deep enough to keep us snowbound. It doesn't seem to snow as much as it did when I was a little girl. I can remember walking on frozen snow as high as the fence tops." "Really? I never saw that much snow." "That must have been lots of fun." "It was, as long as you didn't hit a soft spot and fall in. Then you'd be in snow over your head and you'd need help to climb out." "I wish it would do that again," I said. "I can't think of anything more fun than being snowed in." "Well, I can think of a few things more fun," Grandma replied, "but there probably isn't anything much more exciting. There are lots of things to take care of on a farm if you know you can't get out for a while. I remember one snowstorm where things almost got out of hand around here." It was early spring and the ground had been clear for several weeks. We thought that winter was over and it would soon be warm. One morning when it was still dark, Pa came in from the barn.
"Boys,"
he said to Reuben and Roy,
"I'll need your help after breakfast to get extra feed down for the animals. I smell a storm in the air."
"What does a storm smell like, Pa?" I asked him. Pa looked puzzled.
"I guess I can't tell you that. It's something you just know when you've lived in the country all your life."
"I've lived in the country all my life," I replied, "and I don't ever remember smelling a storm." Roy looked at me in disgust. "What do you know about anything? You probably wouldn't know a storm if you got caught in it." "I would so," I retorted. "I'm as smart as you are."
"Enough," Pa said. "We've heard all this before. Let's eat and get to work."
After breakfast, Pa and the boys departed for the barn, and Ma and I started to clean up the kitchen. As it began to get light, I looked out the window. This day looked as nice as the ones before it. "Pa must have smelled wrong," I said. "It's too nice to storm." "He may have," Ma laughed, "but I wouldn't count on it. He's a pretty good weatherman." As the morning wore on, it began to look as though Pa was going to be right. Clouds came in, and by dinner time it was almost as dark as evening.
"We'll get extra wood after dinner," Pa announced. "And it might be well to bring in the rope from the barn."
I knew what that was for. Pa had a long, heavy rope that he tied to the barn door and stretched along the path to the kitchen door. In a heavy blizzard, it was sometimes hard to see the barn from the house, and the rope was a guide to go out and feed the animals. Before dinner was over, it had begun to snow hard. When they finished eating, Pa and the boys went back out. Ma hurriedly cleaned the table, then put on her heavy sweater. "I'm going to the cellar, Mabel," she said. "I think I'd better bring up some canned goods and vegetables before the snow covers the doors. Would you mind starting the dishes? I'll help as soon as I get back." Ma took a large basket with her and opened the back door. Immediately it was pulled out of her hands and banged against the house. "Mercy! Come and close the door, please, Mabel. This is turning into a real blizzard." And indeed it was. After Ma left, I stood at the window and watched her struggle to get the cellar door open. She finally managed to get one side open and apparently decided that was enough. She disappeared into the cellar. I watched the storm for a few minutes, then reluctantly started the dishes. Sometime later, Pa came around the corner of the house and, seeing the cellar door open, muttered something about those careless boys and closed the door. When he brought a load of wood into the kitchen, he stopped to warm his hands over the stove.
"Where's Ma?"
he asked me. "She went to get some vegetables. She said she'd be right back to help me with the dishes." Pa nodded and went out again. He and the boys brought in load after load of wood. Then they began to carry in water. Pa stopped again by the stove.
"What's the matter here? The fire is dying. Where's Ma?"
"I told you, Pa," I answered. "She went to get some vegetables. She sure has been gone a long time. I've had to do all these dishes alone." Suddenly, Pa looked horrified.
"Vegetables? You mean Ma went to the cellar for vegetables? Why didn't you say so?"
He dashed out the door and down the stairs to the cellar, leaving me saying, "I thought you knew," to an empty kitchen. In a moment they were back with Pa carrying the basket and Ma rubbing her hands together and stamping the snow from her feet. "That cellar is not the warmest place on the farm," she said. "I'd rather have been shut in the barn if you were going to leave me locked up all afternoon. I'll probably catch my death of foolishness." And sure enough, by evening, Ma was feverish and began to cough.
"I'm sorry, Mary Ann," Pa said anxiously. "That was a terrible thing for me to do. I was in such a hurry, I just didn't think."
"Don't worry about it,"
Ma said hoarsely.
"It'll probably be just a slight cold. I'll get to bed early and it'll be all better by morning."
Unfortunately, Ma was wrong. By morning, her cold and the storm had worsened. When she decided to stay in bed, I realized that she was sicker than I had ever known her to be. Pa and the boys were glad to have the rope when they went to milk and feed the animals, but they knew there was no chance of getting farther than the barn.
"As soon as the storm lets up, I'll go and get the doctor for Ma," Pa told us. "I guess you'll all have to help me keep things going until she's well."
Since everyone had to stay in the house, Pa didn't worry about the outside. His biggest problem seemed to be getting the meals.
"This always looks easy when Ma does it," he said to me the next morning. "Ask her how many cups of baking powder to put in the pancakes."
"Cups!"
Ma croaked when I asked her.
"Mercy on us! He'll kill us with indigestion. Tell him 2 tablespoons to 3 cups of flour."
I was kept busy running between the kitchen and the bedroom for instructions. Finally, Ma suggested that he stick to things like meat and potatoes and other vegetables that didn't require mixing.
"I'll be up right away to make bread,"
she said.
"I don't think you'll run out before tomorrow."
We didn't run out of bread, but Ma was not up the next day. Pa was worried. He stood at the window and watched the snow swirl around the porch. The barn was not visible from the house.
"I don't know how we'll get to the doctor if this doesn't stop," he said. "We'll have to ask the Lord to take care of Ma until the storm is over."
"We could ask him to tell the doctor to come," I suggested. "Then you wouldn't have to go after him."
"Yes," Pa said. "We could do that all right. God could certainly send the doctor here if that's his will."
That night, just as we were ready to go to bed, we were startled by a loud banging on the door. When Pa opened it, there, surrounded by snow and wind, stood the doctor.
"Thank the Lord," Pa said as he pulled him into the kitchen. "We prayed that you would come." "What do you mean you prayed that I would come?" the doctor exclaimed. "You didn't even call for me. I was trying to get home from the Gibbs place and I was beginning to think I wouldn't make it anywhere when I saw your light." "Anyway," Pa said, "the Lord sent you and we're grateful."
The doctor took care of Ma and stayed until the following day. When the wind stopped blowing, the men and boys were able to dig through the drifts. Soon, everything was back to normal. That was certainly some storm, probably the worst I can remember. "After that, I guess you believed your Pa could smell a storm, didn't you?" I asked. "Yes," Grandma laughed. "We didn't doubt him again. But I lived many more years in the country, and I don't think I was ever good at sniffing out the weather." I returned to the window to watch the snow and wish I could be snowbound. Just once. End of chapter 6.